Put that apple down. The voice came from between the rows, low and level, the kind of voice that had been giving commands so long it no longer needed to raise itself to be believed. Darby Moss was 12 feet up a ladder she'd been climbing since she was 6 years old, her hand already closing around a Honeycrisp, the size of a small fist, and she did not put it down. She looked. Below, on the grass lane between the old Gravenstein row and the newer Fuji grafts her father had put in 15 years ago, stood a man she had never seen. Dark jacket, sleeves pushed up, one hand in his pocket, the other braced against the ladder's side rail in a way that was either possessive or steadying. She couldn't tell yet. He was looking up at her with the flat, assessing patience of a man who had bought this valley 3 months ago and was still occasionally surprised to find people already in it. "This is private property," he said. "It used to be open to the public during harvest," she said. "The Beckers let the county come pick for charity every September, has for 30 years. The Beckers don't own it." "No," she said. "You do." She came down the ladder anyway, apple in hand, because there was no dignity in arguing from 12 feet up, and because she was cold and the dew had soaked through her jacket cuffs, and the man had not moved and clearly had no intention of doing so. "Darby Moss," she said when her boots hit the grass. He studied her with those flat grey eyes. The morning was pale and smelled of cut hay and cooling fruit, and the particular mineral sweetness that Callaway Ridge gave off in September, a smell so specific to this place that she had never once found it anywhere else, and had long since stopped trying to explain it to anyone who hadn't been here. 20 feet down the row, a pair of barn swallows cut low through the mist. "Whitman," he said. "Colt Whitman." She knew the name. Everyone in the valley knew the name. It had been on the certified letters taped to the farmhouse doors 3 months ago, on the county rezoning notices, on the sign that had gone up at the entrance to the old Becker property. Callaway Ridge Regenerative Partners. The sign was teak and lit from below. Her father would have hated it. "The orchard manager's daughter," she said before he could ask. "My father tended these trees for 22 years. Those Fuji grafts in the next row are his. He put them in the year I started kindergarten." She nodded toward the tree she'd just climbed. "He named that ladder too, called it Mabel." "Don't ask." Something crossed Whitman's face. Not warmth, nothing that generous, but a flicker of recalibration. The look of a man who had expected a simpler conversation. "I'll need your name for the trespass report," he said. The word landed in the exact place it was meant to. Trespass. Darby had $340 in her checking account and a physical therapy license she had driven 4 years of night school and a 90-minute commute to earn, and a trespass on her record would end it before the ink dried on the renewal. She didn't let any of that reach her face. That at least she knew how to do. "I'll go," she said evenly. "You won't see me again." That, she would think later, turning it over in the dark. That was the moment. Not the apple, not the ladder. That sentence and the steadiness she had built over the top of the fear, and the way Colt Whitman looked at her steadiness, the way a man looks at a door he expected to open and found instead a wall. "Wait," he said. She waited. He turned and looked down the row, at the grafted Fujis, at the old Gravensteins, at the ladder she'd been climbing since she was small enough that her father had to spot her at the bottom, and when he looked back, something in his jaw had shifted. "You said you were a caretaker's daughter." He paused. "What do you do now?" "Physical therapist. Sports medicine, mostly. I work out of the Valley Clinic." He looked at her. She looked at him. The swallows circled back. "I've had 3 specialists here in the last 2 months," he said, "and a performance coach who cost more per hour than your clinic probably bills in a week. None of them have done anything useful." He said it without self-pity, which she appreciated, and without asking for sympathy, which she appreciated more. "Show me something useful, and I'll forget I saw you on that ladder." "I haven't examined you. You've been watching my shoulder since I walked up." He wasn't wrong. She had been. It was the same reflex that made her mouth move faster than her sense, whenever someone with money looked at her a certain way. She noticed bodies the way other people noticed weather, and Colt Whitman's right shoulder was telling her a story his performance coach clearly hadn't read. The way he'd braced the ladder with his left hand, not his right. The way his jacket sleeve pulled differently on each side. The careful, deliberate control of his gestures, not timid but managed. A man protecting something. "Rotator cuff," she said. "Probably the supraspinatus. You're guarding it even when you don't mean to." He was quiet for a moment. The morning birds went on overhead. 18 months, he said. "That's how long you've had it, or how long you've been managing it?" "Both." She looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at patients, the way she'd learned to look from watching her father move through pain for years before he'd admitted it to anyone. 18 months was a long time to guard a thing. Long enough to teach the whole body to compensate. Long enough to forget you were doing it. The farmhouse at the top of the ridge, she said. Number 4. The blue one with the wrap-around porch your people have been trying to clear since July. She met his eyes. My mother lives there. There's a date on the demolition order. Something moved behind his face, a recalculation. Fix my shoulder, he said slowly, and I'll take the date off. In writing. In writing. She looked at the Honeycrisp in her pocket. She looked at the row of trees her father had grafted from a scion he'd driven 6 hours to acquire, because he believed, and was right, that no commercial variety would survive the particular microclimate of this ridge. She thought about her mother reading the demolition notice twice and going inside to start a pie, because that was what her mother did with things she couldn't fix. In writing first, she said, before I touch the shoulder. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the suggestion of where a smile might eventually live once it remembered the way. Come up to the house, he said. We'll draw up the terms. The house was long and low and built of reclaimed timber, all glass on the orchard side. A house designed to look at the trees without ever being looked at back. A woman named Nadine ran it, compact and silver-haired and possessed of the specific unhurried authority that comes from managing a large property through 3 different co-owners and finding each one in their own way. More trouble than the last. She handed Darby a mug of coffee without being asked, and gave Colt a look that communicated, in the wordless shorthand of long employment, that she had been listening from the kitchen and had opinions she was choosing for now to keep. Colt had the letter typed and printed before the coffee cooled. Darby read it. 4 sentences. The farmhouse designated Parcel 4, Callaway Ridge, was removed from the demolition schedule indefinitely, pending review, by direct instruction of C. Whitman. Signed already, in a handwriting that looked like a man crossing something out. Indefinitely isn't permanently, she said. Nothing is permanent, he said. Indefinitely is the most honest word I have. She put out her hand. Darby Moss, she said again. Number 4, start there. He took her hand. His grip was dry and warm and considerably stronger than the guarded shoulder had led her to expect. She worked him in the glass room on the east side of the house, kneeling on a folded towel in front of the bad shoulder. And in the first 30 seconds, she understood that his performance coach had been treating the symptom and ignoring everything it was sitting on top of. You brace before you lift, she said. Your whole upper back has learned to preload for pain that doesn't come as often as it used to. So you're carrying tension your shoulder stopped generating months ago. Half of what's wrong with you isn't tissue. It's the 18 months of not trusting it. Can you fix that with a pamphlet? I fix it by making you do things that scare you in a room where nothing bad will happen. She pressed along the joint line, and he flinched and covered the flinch, and she felt both things, the flinch and the cover, with the same precision. There, she said, that's the spot you've been organizing your whole body around. He looked at her with those flat grey eyes. You make it sound like a choice. Not a choice, a habit. Habits can be changed, she sat back. Who else has told you that? No one, he said. They've all told me it's structural. It is structural, and it's also a habit. Both things are true. He was quiet in the way people are quiet when they've been handed the right answer from an unexpected direction. 30 minutes, she said. That's enough for day 1. You want a working shoulder in 6 weeks. You don't get there by tearing it down the first morning to prove you're not afraid. 6 weeks. The harvest gala. Something in the way he said it told her the gala was more than a party. I'm expected to present the Valley project to the investment partners. In person, with both arms working. They've been watching the shoulder. He looked out at the when an operation this size has a principal who can't lift his own arm at a podium, people start asking whether the principal still has his eyes on the wheel. I understand injuries, Darby said. I don't understand investment structures. Then we're each uninformed about exactly the right thing. That corner of his mouth again. Closer this time. She was almost to the door when he said quietly, to the glass rather than to her. Every specialist I've had treats me like a liability. Your hands are the first thing in 18 months that have looked at this as a problem that can actually be solved. She heard it. She filed it the way she filed everything, in the place where bodies told her what mouths couldn't. 6 weeks, she said at the door. And you learn the names. All the families on the demolition schedule, not just number 4. If you're going to remove people's homes, you ought to know what to call them. He turned then. The surprise was real, the first she'd pulled out of him. The names aren't part of the shoulder. No, she said, they're part of the deal. A long moment. Then, all right. She left with the letter in her jacket pocket, folded next to the apple she hadn't returned. On the third morning, the development director arrived. His name was Prescott Vane, and he moved through the glass room like a man who'd approved its construction. Handsome in the way of someone who'd never needed to earn it, with a leather folio under one arm and the easy fluency of a person who had already counted every card in the room before walking in. He looked at Darby the way people look at something they're pricing, without meaning to show it. Prescott Vane, Valley Development. The smile arrived before it was needed. And you're the physical therapist Colt found in the orchard. He turned the word slightly, found, as if she were something misplaced, small world, smaller ridge. Smaller farmhouse, she said. The smile adjusted by nothing. He turned to Colt and the folio came up. The partners wanted the groundbreaking confirmed before the gala, a rendering behind Colt while he made the announcement. The comeback and the launch in one photograph. Push it until after, Colt said. We can't push it, the partners. Push it, Prescott. Darby had gone very quiet, in the way she went quiet in treatment rooms when a body told her something important. She could feel the two currents meeting, the man who'd signed 4 sentences an hour ago, and the man whose entire function was to ensure those 4 sentences never cost anything. May I say something? She said. No, said Prescott pleasantly. She may, said Colt. She stood in her clinic sweatshirt and muddy boots and said what she knew. You want the photograph. You want him standing whole at the podium. Then the last thing you want is to announce a groundbreaking on the parcels currently occupied by the families he's asked me to learn the names of. Stress reloads a guarding joint faster than anything else in my 8 years of practice. You get the photograph, or you get the groundbreaking announcement. This particular month, you do not get both. The room was quiet. Through the glass, the orchard lay silver and damp. Prescott looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he'd assumed was a wall. He hired a ladder girl to set his medical schedule, he said to Colt. Not to her. Now she's setting the development calendar. She's setting my shoulder, Colt said. You walked the development into her treatment room. Walk it back out. He stood, the careful, deliberate rise of a man who had been protecting his right side for 18 months, and did it anyway in front of the one person he least wanted to show it to. The farmhouse timeline stays where it is until after the gala. At the door, Prescott paused. You keep saying my orchard, my valley, my shoulder, he said, lightly. At some point, someone will remind you how many of those you actually own outright. He said it like a joke. It was not a joke, and all 3 of them knew it. Darby drove home the long way. The letter sat on the passenger seat like a small folded promise. She found her mother, Joan, on the porch of the farmhouse with her mending in her lap, and the particular stillness of a woman who had learned not to ask questions about things she couldn't change. Darby sat on the step and put the letter in her mother's hands. Joan read it twice. She folded it along the same crease as the original demolition notice. Darby noticed and didn't say so, and was quiet a long time. Your father shook hands with 3 different owners of this orchard, she said finally, without bitterness, which was the worst possible way to say it. Every one of them told him the farmhouse was ours as long as a Moss wanted to tend the trees. He believed all 3. He built the addition on the back of this house on a handshake. She set the letter in her mending basket. So you tell me, Darby, what's this one's word worth? Darby didn't have an answer. 2 days later, Prescott called her. He found the diner on Route 12 on his own, which surprised her, and he was already in the corner booth when she walked in. A leather folio on the table, and a glass of water he wasn't touching. He rose when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and pulled the vinyl bench out an inch as though it were velvet. Do you know what a performance covenant is? He said, once she'd sat. I fix shoulders, Darby said. I don't run companies. Of course you don't. He turned the page to face her, dense with clauses, the kind of document that costs money by the paragraph. 18 months ago, Colt had the accident. 6 weeks where no one knew if he'd operate at full capacity again. A valley project this size can't sit idle for 6 weeks, so the partners required a provision. Standard protective language. It says that operational control of the Callaway Ridge parcels rests with Colt Whitman so long as he is demonstrably fit to lead. He let a beat pass, And it names the demonstration. The iced tea sweated under her palm. The Harvest Gala, she said. A public appearance in full capacity before the complete board and partners. If he makes it, if he walks in whole, both arms working, the comeback, control is his and your mother's house is worth exactly what he says it's worth. He closed the folio gently. And if he doesn't, control of the Valley parcels transfers to the partner group I answered to. And every 4-sentence promise he signed in 11 minutes becomes a piece of paper with no legal standing whatsoever. She made her face a lid inside, the morning tilted. Why are you telling me this? She said. You want that shoulder to fail. You want the covenant. So why drive 40 minutes to hand me the one fact that makes me work twice as hard to heal him? He looked at her with something close to genuine regard. Because I don't want him to fail, he said quietly. I want him to lose. There's a difference. And it's the whole difference. He turned his water glass a slow quarter turn. If the shoulder fails and he can't make the gala, he's a wounded man and everyone's sympathetic and the story becomes a tragedy. Tragedies make investors nervous for years. But if the shoulder works, if he walks in whole and strong, and he loses the Valley anyway, cleanly on the numbers because the founding milestone wasn't met, that's not a tragedy. That's the market being the market. Nobody panics. The strongman simply made an over-leveraged deal. The smile finally reached his eyes, which was the worst thing his face had done all morning. Heal him beautifully, Darby. Get him across that room on his own 2 arms. It changes nothing about who owns your mother's porch on the other side of it, and it lets me be the reasonable one. I'd genuinely rather be the reasonable one. She stood, she left the iced tea untouched. You drove 40 minutes to tell me that, she said. Reasonable men who've already won don't do that. So somewhere in your clean page there's something you missed. She pushed the bench back an inch, the way he'd pulled it out for her. I read bodies for a living, Mr. Vane. I'll find the nail. At the door, he called after her. Ask him who holds the note on the farmhouses, he said. Ask him tonight while you've got his arm in your hands. Watch his jaw when he answers. She found Colt that afternoon at the old stone wall at the orchard's edge, standing with his good arm braced on the lichen, his face turned toward the rose in the way faces go when they're alone and not performing. Then he heard her footsteps and the face closed. The way the house was always colder than the day outside. She told him what Prescott had said. All of it. The covenant and the milestone and the 40-minute drive and the water nobody touched. She watched his jaw. You knew, she said. You signed that letter knowing it was built on a condition you might not be able to meet. And you let me take it to my mother. Yes. He said it the way he said all his hard things. Flat, without softening. The covenant is real. I signed it from a hospital bed because if I hadn't, the partnership would have dissolved and taken 80 jobs with it, and a man deciding whether his arm will ever work again is not in a strong position to negotiate. And yes, the partner group holds the note on the farmhouses. I leveraged the purchase against the development itself, which means I don't own the farmhouses outright. I own the right to decide what happens to them, but only for as long as the covenant says I'm fit to hold that right. So when you told me you'd take the date off my mother's door, I told you the strongest true thing I could stand on that morning. He turned to her, and the grey eyes had nothing left behind them. No boardroom, no management. I didn't tell you how narrow the ground was, because if you'd seen how narrow it was, you'd have left. And I would have gone back to being handled carefully by everyone around me. He looked out at the orchard. I have spent 18 months being managed by people who only give me the parts of the truth that keep me calm. And then a woman I found on a ladder read my shoulder across 30 feet of dew-wet grass and told me the difference between what was broken and what was only afraid. And I thought, for about 11 minutes, for exactly as long as it took to sign that page, that if I gave her something true, even a narrow true thing, she might hand me something true back. He was quiet a moment. She has. So no, I didn't tell you how narrow it was, because I was afraid that if you knew, you'd stop. That's the ugly answer. I don't have a better one. The orchard smelled of ripe fruit and cold soil, and the particular damp of a September that was about to turn. There's a nail, she said. Prescott said there is. There is. He turned the walking stick over once on his palm. He'd been using it less, she had noticed, since last week. It's not in his page, the demonstration clause. The morning I walk into that gala unaided, before the full board and partners, I don't just keep operational control for a window. For 72 hours I hold sole and unilateral authority over every parcel on this ridge. No board vote, no partner consent. It was written to let a recovered man reassure the market. Sign the development forward. Break ground. Take the photograph Grant always wanted. He looked at her. It also lets a recovered man spend 72 hours signing farmhouses to the families who live in them, permanently, before a single partner can file a motion to stop it. Darby sat very still on the stone wall. "That's the nail," she said slowly. "That's the nail. I walk in whole, and the clause they wrote to cage me becomes the only clause that sets everyone free. And what does that cost you?" His jaw, she watched it. "Everything," he said simply. "The farmhouses are the collateral. If I deed them away, the development can't be secured. If the development can't be secured, the milestone isn't met. If the milestone isn't met, control of the valley transfers to the partners." He met her eyes steadily. "I keep the ridge and I lose the company, everything with my name on it." 3 days before the gala, Prescott moved the milestone review to the morning of the event itself, hours before the doors opened. He texted Darby at 2 in the morning, because that was the kind of man he was, to make sure she heard it before Colt did. She drove to the ridge before 6. Colt was already at the stone wall, facing the orchard in the grey pre-dawn. "He moved it," she said. "I know." He turned the walking stick over in his hands once, then set it down against the wall. He did not pick it up again. He also just showed me exactly where the door is. Something in his face had gone very level and very clear, the way water goes clear after it settles. In a few days, if I cross that room, the clause he wrote becomes the one thing standing between him and losing everything he spent 2 years building here. He moved the review to catch me short. He forgot he was the one who designed the room. He looked at her. "How's the shoulder?" "Better than it was. Not what it needs to be yet." She moved to him and put her hands on it without ceremony, the way she'd learned to do, directly, without making an occasion of it. She felt the joint. She felt the change in it. 3 weeks of work. 3 weeks of a shoulder learning slowly to trust something again. "Push into my hand. Give me the honest amount, not the amount you want me to think you have." He pushed. It was more than yesterday. Meaningfully more. "There," she said. "That's the muscle coming home." She felt him breathe. The night before the gala, she nearly didn't go. She sat on her mother's porch with the September air going cold and the orchard below them dark and silent, and she let herself hold the worst possible reading. What if the farmhouse was only ever a lever to keep her working? What if a man who'd spent 18 months being handled had found the one woman who wouldn't handle him and used her precisely? Had said the true things to the trees because he knew she was always close enough to hear. She held it. She made herself sit with it until she could look straight at it and not flinch. Her mother came out with 2 cups of tea and didn't ask. "I think I have to go in not knowing," Darby said, not already believing him. "If I walk in certain, I can't read the room straight, and someone in that room needs to read it straight." Joan was quiet a long moment. Then, "Your father would have gone. That's not a comfort. It's just true. He'd have gone not knowing and done the right thing, and it cost him everything he had, which was a handshake and a porch." She stood, the cups clinking. "Go. Wear your grandmother's earrings. If you're walking into a room full of money to find out whether a man is honest, do it looking like someone who already knows the answer." The harvest gala was all polished wood and candlelight, and the smell of the valley's apples pressed and poured into something expensive. The partners were gathered near the east wall, 4 of them, silver and unhurried, with Prescott Vane at the center in his perfect jacket, the leather folio on the table beside him. Behind him on an easel stood a rendering. The valley transformed, the old farmhouses gone, a wellness pavilion and production complex in their place. Number 4 wasn't labeled. She knew exactly where it had been. Prescott found her immediately. "You came." He lowered his voice to the warm, confiding register she'd learned to distrust. "He's not here yet." "He'll be here." "Of course." His smile was patient. "The milestone review is in 12 minutes. The funding gap is real, Darby. He doesn't have it and won't have it because I spent the last year making sure he wouldn't. When it isn't met, control transfers, cleanly on the numbers. And then he can walk in on both arms like a phoenix. You've done wonderful work." He looked at her almost gently. "It changes nothing about who owns that porch on the other side of the room." The room shifted. A sound moved through it. 200 people turning toward the same point. Darby turned with them. At the top of the wide staircase stood Colt Whitman, in a dark jacket, no walking stick, his right arm at his side, not tucked, not guarded, not held at the careful 20-degree angle she had memorized in the first week, loose, present, his own. He came down the stairs fully and evenly, the shoulder doing the small natural work it was built for, and had forgotten how for 18 months and crossed the length of the room while the partners watched, and the board watched, and Prescott Vane's handsome face, went the color of held breath, and Colt was not protecting anything, and neither for the first time in a very long time was his body. He stopped at the podium. He looked at the rendering on the easel, at the wellness pavilion where the blue farmhouse with the wraparound porch had stood for 60 years. He looked at it for 1 full second. Then he reached inside his jacket and laid a document on the table. "It's 11:58, Prescott said, stepping in. "Colt, the milestone is due at noon. The funding isn't." "I know," Colt said, the doc voice, the one that had never needed to be raised. "You made very sure it wouldn't be. That was good work, Prescott. You built a very elegant cage." He unfolded the document. "You forgot you were the one who wrote the lock." "The demonstration clause," he said to the partners now, to the room. "Page 9 of the covenant Mr. Vane drafted. The morning I appear before this body in full executive capacity, I hold sole and unilateral authority over the Callaway Ridge parcels for 72 hours. It was written to let me reassure you." He clicked the pen. "I've read it differently." And with 200 people watching and the rendering behind him and the clock at 11:59, Colt Whitman signed the Ridge farmhouses away. All 6 of them, deeded permanently to their residents in fee simple. Number 4 first, the name he had learned on a stone wall in September spelled out in his dark, direct hand. "Which means," he said, capping the pen into the silence, "that at noon the milestone comes due against collateral I no longer hold. Control of the Callaway Ridge development transfers to the partners, as written on the numbers." He looked at Prescott. "You wanted me to lose, I heard you, so I chose what to lose." Then the ghost of a smile became the thing itself, real and unhurried and a long time arriving. Prescott Vane stood in the candlelight with the folio under his arm, and the rendering at his shoulder, and nothing useful left on his face. "You gave away the company," he said. His voice came out thin. "You had it. You walked in whole. You had control for 72 hours. You could have signed the groundbreaking and kept everything, and I would have." "You would have taken it apart from the inside anyway," Colt said without heat. "I know. You've been doing it for a year." He looked at the 4 partners with the calm attention of a man who had just put something very heavy down. "You'll have the valley. You'll also have him. I'd look at his last 12 months of decisions very carefully before you decide which of those you're happier about." One of the partners, a woman with the quiet authority of someone who had made money by asking the questions other people were too polite to ask, was already looking at Prescott with a different expression than she'd worn 60 seconds ago. That was the whole of it. Not a dramatic fall. Just 200 people, and a room full of candlelight watching a very reasonable man discover that the room had been counting cards without him. Prescott gathered his folio and left through the side door, and the candles went on burning, and nobody moved to hold it open. Darby had not moved from where she stood. Her heart was going hard in the way it had gone on the ladder, and not from cold. Colt came through the parting crowd and stopped a foot from her, and looked at her with eyes that had nothing left in them. No boardroom, no performance, no managed careful distance. Only the thing that had been underneath everything since the ladder, offered now with nothing held back and nothing hedged. "You didn't know," he said. "When you walked in tonight, you didn't know if I'd do it." "I couldn't afford to know," she said, and her voice was not quite steady, and she let it not be for once in a room full of strangers. "If I'd already believed you, I couldn't have read the room straight, and someone in this room needed to read it straight." She swallowed. "I spent last night holding the worst possible version of this, that the farmhouse was the most elegant management of all, that I was the last specialist in a house full of them, handled so well I'd mistaken it for being seen. And now?" She looked at him. She read him the way she read everything, directly, without bracing for the answer. "Now I think you just signed your valley away in front of everyone who could have stopped you," she said. "And you're standing here looking like a man who finally set down something he'd been carrying for 18 months. "I couldn't have set it down," he said, "if someone hadn't spent 6 weeks teaching my shoulder to trust again." He didn't touch her. The not touching was the whole sentence. "I've spent 18 months being managed by people who gave me the careful version of everything," he said. "And I would rather be broken and get fixed than handled gently for the rest of my life. I know that because a woman I found on a ladder in my orchard told me those are 2 different things, and I believe her completely." He looked at her, and the grey eyes were entirely finally open. "I love you, Darby. That's not a provision. That's the only thing I own outright." She looked at his shoulder, the one she had spent 6 weeks coaxing back to itself, the one that had just carried him down a flight of stairs and across a ballroom without guarding anything, And as if bodies always knew the right moment to say the truest thing, it gave one small involuntary tremor, not pain, just 6 weeks of held effort finally releasing, and her hands were already there, both of them flat against his arm, steady and certain and exactly where she'd promised. "I told you I'd catch you," she said against his shoulder. "You said you'd catch anybody." His arms came around her, careful and warm and longer in reach than she'd expected. Reflex. "Don't flatter yourself, Whitman." He was laughing. The real sound, the unguarded one, the sound that startled birds off their branches, and she was laughing and crying somewhere inside the same breath, and did not particularly care which 200 people witnessed which. The farmhouse papers were signed in a lawyer's office on Route 12 the following Tuesday. All 6 families, 6 permanent deeds. Joan Moss read hers twice, lips barely moving, and put it in her good handbag, not the mending basket. On the way out, she stopped in front of Colt and looked up at him with the particular assessment of a woman who had been waiting a long time to make it. "You learned the names," she said. "All 6 families." She nodded once, confirming something she'd been holding in reserve. Then, dry as an October morning, "You'll want someone to look at the fence on the north side of the property before winter. The deer have been using it as a suggestion rather than a barrier for 3 years now." She moved past him toward the door. "My daughter knows a man who works cheap these days. Gave away his whole operation for a porch and an apple orchard." A pause at the threshold. "He's available, I'm told." The valley changed the way real things change, slowly, without announcement. The rendering came down from the gala easel. The partner group reviewed Prescott Vane's last months of decisions and showed him out with the same 4 signatures he'd always favored, and considerably less ceremony than he'd shown anyone. The market, being the market. Colt bought back the lodge with what was his outright, which was less than it had been and more than enough. The walking stick hung on a hook by the kitchen door. He only took it on the long days, and there were fewer long days as autumn went on, and the shoulder learned, finally, to stop expecting the worst from itself. Nadine stayed, obviously she stayed. "You bought me with the property," she said, setting eggs in front of Darby that were warm for the first time since Darby had started eating breakfast at that table. "And I've decided to be worth what was paid for me." She looked out through the glass at the orchard in its October colors, which means someone needs to remind you that a shoulder tightens in cold weather, and the mobility work should happen before the email, not after. She turned back to the stove with the composure of a woman who had outlasted 3 owners and intended to outlast several more. Outside, the orchard was in its second blazing, the reds and golds of late harvest, the trees her father had grafted standing full and unhurried in the ridge light. The apples her father had chosen for this particular cold and this particular soil, and nowhere else on earth. Darby still came every morning. That had not changed and would not. She walked out the kitchen door of the farmhouse that was, at last and for good, hers, down the old rows, through the mist that gathered in the low places between trees, into the particular sweetness of Callaway Ridge, in the early cold, the smell she had never been able to explain and had stopped trying to. She climbed the ladder. Sometimes a voice came from below, low and unhurried, learning at last what a voice could do besides give orders. That better not be the last Honeycrisp. There were exactly 2 left, she called down through the leaves. "I'm taking one. The math is generous." She heard him laugh, the real sound, easier now than it had once been, and the orchard went on being itself around them, the old trees and the new light, and the particular morning of a ridge that had been loved long enough to know how to stay.